We are one of the very few places in the world with a major city that's located in such close proximity to amazing mountains, amazing rafting. You know, there's just so much available backcountry and such a diversity of landscapes.
We could become one of the great urban economies in the world.
The bulk of our business community is along the Wasatch Front, and when I describe the Wasatch Front, that's from, you know, the northern tips of Weber County to the southern tips of Utah County and reflective of Tooele County. And that's a 90-mile corridor, and 90% of our population in the state of Utah actually lives in that 90-mile corridor. So most of our commerce lives in this corridor.
Salt Lake City proper gained more residential population than any city in the state in the last year. Growth is a double-edged sword.
Having our state be so successful economically is a great thing, but it brings challenges because it's bringing a lot of people. It's hard to keep up, and government doesn't move as fast as development. So the impacts are felt. Trying to provide infrastructure and services to all of those people is a challenge. Trying to make sure we have enough police and fire. Trying to make sure that our roads can accommodate the added traffic and that we have things in place. I think that's our biggest challenge, and there's a lot that stems from that. There's a whole lot to that. Growth is a big general term for a whole lot of issues.
We've seen a lot of increases to area source pollution. We've failed to meet federal health standards for air quality for the last decade here along the Wasatch Front.
A risk is that we have so many bad air days that we send a significant signal to skilled labor that Salt Lake is not where you want to be. Local government is in many ways ground zero for sustainable development.
If you don't have good people in those offices who are making environmentally ethical decisions, then you end up with really poor policies coming out of the state.
It is not overstatement to say that the obstacle to sustainability tends to more be local regulation, perhaps than almost anything else. You think about a large metro area like Paris or London, and you think about that place existing without public transportation, it could not possibly exist.
It's absolutely key to our sustainability and our growth that we have adequate transportation infrastructure. It's critical.
Public transportation can be a key way to grow an economy. It's seen increasingly as a real amenity of a high-class city. If we say no to growth within those valleys at that point, that where does it go? It means it's going to spill out into new valleys. That has significant impacts on transportation, on air quality. It means that those residents are going to tend to have incredibly long commuting distances with very poor transportation options.
This looks like Southern California. This looks like the Seattle area. This looks like the Portland area. We know what our future will look like as far as expense, commute times, congestion, air quality, if we don't start getting ahead of this. I would say the number one factor that has led to the economic development and the intense population growth has been Utah. Simply Utah. It is a great place to live and to work and to play.
We are located where we are an affordable option to expensive California metro areas. We are in a great place to interrelate with strong economies elsewhere in the country.
Not always been number one, and we have been lately. And it's super difficult to get to the number one economy in the nation, and it's even harder to stay. There's approximately 63,000 businesses in the state of Utah that reflect about 1.4 million Utahns. We are landlocked by the lakes to the west and the mountains to the east, and we don't continue to have the ability to sprawl in the Wasatch Front.
We are facing this issue more than any metro area like ours. We will run out of larger pieces of vacant land within about 15 years.
The biggest challenge I think that we face here in South Jordan is growth, and rapid growth. Two-thirds of Salt Lake County, land-wise, is located west of I-15. Two-thirds of the residents of the county will all be west of I-15. With 10,000 more housing families created than housing units over the last 5 years, there's a shortage, and we all know housing is expensive. Just because maybe a more dense housing type goes in, it doesn't mean it's affordable.
In late 2016, we started hearing from a number of businesses that their employees, either that they were recruiting in or that were already here living in Utah, were having a hard time finding houses or getting on the ladder somewhere on the housing spectrum. There was just this feeling of something is different. It looks back a generation ago, it looks at the generation that we're in right now and a generation ahead. And we're not on a crisis today, but we're on the horizon of a crisis.
We don't have a lot of infrastructure to get people east and west in this end of the valley. We have almost no transit service, hardly any transit service.
Transportation planning at the regional scale is a very interesting thing to do because it depends so much on what local governments and the development community do with patterns of development, where people choose to live and work.
A lot of people like to drive, like to take their own car, but there are a lot of people that would use public transportation if it were available. We have a front runner station on the east end of our city and a TRAX line on the west end of our city, and nothing that connects them. With Silicon Slopes going, down in Lehigh area, and with the point of the mountain that will change and develop significantly, we need people to be able to get to this part of the valley because it's where a lot of those people are going to live. People who work there are going to live here, and we need to make it easier for them to get there.
People cannot move freely unless we have a good and efficient multimodal transportation system. And I say that multimodal. It's key to have roads and highways and interstate commerce, but it's also really important to have a transit system, a biking and walking system, so people have choices.
Downtown Salt Lake City has taken significant strides over the last handful of years in making it a more walkable and bikeable city. If you reflect on the fact that we're running out of land, think about the I-15 corridor. If we have more and more people, widening a freeway like that becomes a prohibitive opportunity. It becomes amazingly expensive to widen a road like I-15. Whereas public transportation, the ability to move more and more people on public transportation is not so much dependent on the width of the route itself, but simply on the frequency of a train. So it becomes a space-efficient way to move people.
Pricing and connectivity continue to be kind of limiting factors for people people's willingness to actually take public transit. If it costs you more money and more time to ride public transportation, then you're going to end up taking a passenger vehicle. It's pretty ridiculous that Utahns have been already suffering for more than a decade with air pollution levels that are higher than federal health standards say are safe.
Surveys of high-tech employees in our region or that are thinking about coming to Utah, one of the very biggest issues on their mind is air quality. And if we don't proactively address the quality of our air, then that is going to, over time, significantly affect our economy. I would say it already is. If we're trying to help people connect to jobs more easily, travel more easily, and do those things with a lower impact on air quality, and to do that inexpensively, then that means that we have to not just pay attention to where infrastructure goes, but we've also got to engage in a conversation about where development patterns occur as well.
Not having smart growth is probably the biggest threat. We need to have smart urban planning. We need to be able to say the words limited growth boundaries, which is something I think a lot of Utahns aren't comfortable with.
We know from places like New York City and Chicago that when a place runs out of vacant land, that doesn't mean it needs to stop growing. We have another option, and that option is that we can add a significant amount of housing and jobs within those valleys even after we have run out of vacant land.
We should stick high-density housing near where transportation corridors can absorb the amount of people that live in those high-density residences. But we have to start closing the gap.
A new resident in downtown Salt Lake City is going to have the lowest negative impact on the region. They're going to be traveling the shortest distance. They're going to be the most likely to walk, bike, use public transportation. They're going to be locating in a place where you don't need to build a new road. You don't need to build new infrastructure.
The only way we make those changes is by breaking down the silos, and by the silos I mean not just looking at economic development, not just looking at transportation, not just looking at land use, not just talking about air quality, but breaking down those silos and saying one affects the other, that affects the other, that affects the other.
We all need to be more willing to make sacrifices if we want to live in an airshed that's not polluted, if we want to have a place that families can grow in a healthy way. There have to be concessions made.
Economic benefit of public transportation is it means that people have the ability to move around without emitting air pollutants.
Our public transit system here is really critical to mitigating our air pollution problem. We have really fantastic infrastructure in place. We have to be willing to, take the extra 5 minutes and ride the train or bike to work or do those kind of things so that we can all kind of breathe a little easier.
You won't feel the pinch of the population growth if people have different options and how they get around.
We can think about some of the investments that growth enables us to provide. One of them is a rebuild of the Salt Lake International Airport. Another might be looking ahead, better public transportation to our resorts, growing opportunities in culture and the arts.
We're the crossroads of the West. We have 4 distinct seasons here. It's a great place to live, and people have figured it out.
It'll be bigger than it is now. We'll have even more large employers and large companies, and this will still be a place where people want to live and love to be.
Right now you think of New York and LA and Chicago and Boston and all those major cities, but Salt Lake City will be top of mind.